I've never been a big fan of camping before, but around 2012, for some reason, my friend and I decided to go camping on private property on a Saturday night, with the owner's permission, on a small beach. A lake in the rural American southeast. The lake was not very big, maybe 150 yards. I'm not great at estimating distances. It was a deep pond in my opinion, but it was 5 times as long, and from the vantage point of our camp, it consumed most of our view. The land itself is not completely removed from civilization. We were about 5 or 10 miles from a small suburb south of the city, but of course access was not easy, and the only access was a gated, narrow dirt road across a levee that ran along one side of the lake. This road was blocked by a gate. The owner gave us his code. We pulled the car over and locked the tailgate. Now, if you've ever been down south, you know how quickly it gets isolated outside of the cities. Our cities are small, and the surrounding countryside is often rough and wild. We have a dense forest, so thick that they really shouldn't be built on, I think, unless there is some connection to the area. I've heard that in the 1950s, when highways were being built, it wasn't good to cut roads. So there has not been much development in the last 100 years, and in some places, even civil war. Now, a 30-minute drive out of town and access to off-grid cabins is rare. My friend and I were used to living in the suburbs, so we enjoyed seeing the stars and hearing the sounds of nature. We were in a very utilitarian camp, a small Coleman tent with 2 people on blankets, looking around and enjoying the night, when suddenly my friend sat up straight. He said something like, "Do you see that guy?" He pointed to the other side of the small lake. I didn't see anything. I sat for a while and said, "Well, that's some dark gaming tricks for you." He looked really shaken. "No, look, now there are a bunch of faces behind the trees." This caught my attention, and I sat up completely, rubbing my eyes to focus fully. Then I saw them. Small, round, white faces look at me from across the lake, maybe 15 or 20 of them. All of them were positioned in such a way that their bodies were behind the trees and only their heads were visible. The best way to describe the faces was very pale, like children with some kind of inner light. Needless to say, none of us drank too much. We were too young for that, at least for a few more years. We had dinner at home and were planning to sleep after cooling down a bit, even if the faces don't move. I sat there in shock, thinking my eyes were adjusting and seeing if their reflection was a bug or a bull or something, but I never understood. I looked at them for what seemed like 5 minutes, turned around, looked at my friend, and then suddenly they were gone. Bodies of water are very noisy, and we heard a big splash from across the lake and a few small branches shaking too. What do your ears hear in such a silent night? My friend cried a little. What's that? I didn't have a good answer. Neither of us slept particularly well that night. My dislike of camping was confirmed in my feelings, but what was I going to do in this situation? In the end, we woke up early, quickly packed up and left. I tried to do some research on the internet, but couldn't find a scene that explained this, so here I am. Do you have any theories as to what this could be? In 2018 and 2019, I was away from home with my little brother and entertained him while my family was away. I don't remember exactly what we were doing, but I suddenly felt like I was being watched. I looked past my brother to the wooded area in front of my house. In the hollow before the wooded forest, I see a figure of a head emerge. It had the head of a fox or a cat or something, I think. Ears pointed, white fur, black eyes. Ears were white and tipped black. When I locked eyes with him, he shot up. At first, I was going to look into the pit, but something screamed at me. About 20 minutes later, my back is facing the forest, and my brother is facing the forest. We talked while he stopped mid-sentence and looked at me confused and puzzled. I turn around and see a dark figure running into the woods. We were just looking at the forest, and then I got an idea and told my brother to go inside and get one of the flashlights. It's one of those really powerful ones. You can adjust the distance and the brightness to light up the room during the day, or when it's completely dark. It's like you're turning on a light in the room. He goes and picks it up and hands it to me. As I stared into the forest, slowly searching for something, I stopped near the right corner of the forest. That's when I looked back and saw that there were white eyes. We looked at this thing in amazement, and then I realized something. Our house is on the hill, you see. They are not in the forest. So no matter what happened, he looked at us and stood level with the mountain. This hill was very big. The eyes looked at us, then to the side, then they turned from left to right. We would watch it and turn on the flashlight to wait for 5 or 10 minutes. But it won't be. We didn't have phones to take photos or videos. He didn't even bother, to be honest. But we stayed until it got dark, which was almost 2 hours, and the figure kept looking at us, moving from time to the left or right. My brother finally ran inside and said he now had an idea and grabbed a BB gun, took aim and tried to shoot at it. The eyes looked down and slowly turned back. He took the flashlight and told me to scare him. Again, I focused where there were eyes and nothing. The eyes moved around and slowly turned towards us. 30 minutes pass and we are still doing the same routine. Turn off the light, wait a minute or two, then turn it back on, and the eyes are still staring at us, still twitching. Then my grandfather came home and we tried to show him what we saw, and when we did, it disappeared. We tried to tell him what we saw, and he told us it was a raccoon. We tried to tell him it wasn't. I mean, something else had to happen with his size. In the end, he scoffed at us and shouted that it was a raccoon and not to ask or talk about it again. Shortly after telling him about it, we moved out of the blue without warning. Before officially moving on, my grandfather looked out into the forest, shook his head, then looked up. I don't know what I saw that day, but my grandfather knew exactly what he saw, but he never wanted to tell us. I live in a college town with 6 other girls in their 20s. The town we live in, it's not that pretty, has a big homelessness and drug problem, and breaks are not uncommon. However, what happened last Saturday was certainly strange. My roommates and I, along with some of our boyfriends, were hanging out at the house drinking while the 2 girls decided to go out to a bar. Around 1 a.m., the 2 girls came home from the bar and everyone was tired, so we all went to our rooms to sleep. Later that night, someone opened the door and stood in my room staring at me. In my head, I thought it was one of my roommate's boyfriends. Are my boyfriend and I still staying up to keep the party going? I pretended to be asleep because I was tired. After a while, the man closes my door and walks back down the hall. Then they try to open the door of my roommate, whose room is next to mine. Luckily, her door was locked and her boyfriend was with her. The man then reaches into the drawer and takes a knife to try to pick the lock. After gathering some courage, her boyfriend yells, "Who is she?" This scares the man. Then he climbs the stairs to the front door. The police were called and searched, but apparently found nothing. They told us that breaks were normal, we knew. However, what makes this script crappier is that it doesn't steal anything. My phone, alcohol, and $600 pair of shoes were still untouched. We also suspect that the man was not under the influence of drugs or alcohol as he moved very calmly and deliberately. He was able to get in because the 2 girls who had just come home from the bar apparently hadn't locked the door. I don't know what this man's intentions are, but I'm thankful that my boyfriend is with me at night, and it's not like he lives 3 hours away and sleeps. It was a strange man in my room, and it gives me peace to think of what might happen to me if I were alone. When I was 7 years old, my parents and I lived in a basement apartment in the Bronx. The way the apartment was laid out, there was my mother and father's bedroom at one end of the short hall, the bathroom in the middle, and my bedroom at the other end. If you don't know anything about a basement apartment, know that getting in through a window doesn't take much effort. One morning, probably around 7 or 8, I was awakened by a sharp pain in my cheek. I kept thinking the cat had come into my room and bit me or something. It was kicking hard and attacking at will, toes, so I jumped up to look for him, only to see an older man sitting on my bed. I remember being upset and asking him why he was squeezing me. He hugged me and said something about being thirsty. I remember pulling off my nightgown and asking her if she wanted juice or water. I wasn't scared at all. I was surprised and mad that this man had squeezed my leg so hard. She said she needed juice, so I left the room and closed the door sitting on my bed. I went to the kitchen and got him some juice. After bringing the bowl into the room, I looked at my parents' door and thought I should wake them up, but I don't remember why I did. And I gave the man a cup, and he drank the juice. I remember he asked me if I could help him find his friend, and he told me he was lost. I remember my father not letting me go out without him or my mother, but they were worried because it was a new neighbor. We just moved in maybe 2 weeks ago. I remember being afraid to go out because I didn't want my parents to be angry with me. So I told him to wake up and ask my parents. I remember him saying that it would be very soon because he knew that his friend was somewhere and that we would find him soon. I'm not there again, and told me that I'm not allowed to go outside without my parents. So he told me that he didn't need any more help and that he would find them. He asked me to lock the door behind him, so I let him out and locked the door and said goodbye. I tried to go back to sleep, but it was late, and I woke up at this point, so I started watching cartoons. The noise was louder than expected as my mother woke up and asked me very angrily why I woke up so early. I told her about the tight squeeze, and at first she didn't believe me because it was my bad dream. But he lifted up my nightgown, and I think maybe I had more or something. I'll never forget how she calmed down and started smiling at me, and in a very sweet voice asked me if I remembered what she looked like, what she was, and what she was wearing. I told him to leave the room with my father for a moment. Then she asked me to say everything using the same sweet voice. And I did. I didn't think I was in trouble, and I thought I made a new friend. After telling them about my new friend, they got dressed and started searching. Well, it didn't last long because he was a member of the Supers family. When I saw him, I immediately yelled at him, "Oh, my friend." My parents told me to get into it, and I did. Maybe an hour or so later, my parents came back with McDonald's for me, but they seemed very angry. By the end of the day, my father had put a lock on my door and told me to always close my door when I went to bed because the kitchen windows were not locked, because apparently that's how he got in. Sometime later, I was 15 years old. I learned that the boy was mentally ill and had been sent away from the Dominican Republic by his family so he wouldn't be arrested for dealing with another little girl. Yes, that's about it. It all amazes me that I wasn't scared until now. But please, if you or someone you know lives in a basement, first-floor apartment or flat, please triple-check that your window locks are working and keep your windows closed at all times. I moved to a rural area in the mountains of North Georgia, Alabama. Sand Mountain was the name of the place, and it was connected to Dade County Gar, but through Higdon, Alabama. I was about 8 years old, so when I first got there, it was a complete culture shock to move from a large urban area in the Southwest. I vividly remember driving through a virtual sea of green outside of Atlanta. Soon, the freshness of the trees wore off, and I pigeonholed myself into the book to drown out the charms of the long drive to the new home. At some point, I started to feel very uncomfortable, so I told my mother. He wrote it off as a symptom of a major life change or something to that effect. I tried my best to accept it, but the anxiety and feeling of oppression made it worse. The pain seemed to be directly connected to my new home. It was a feeling I would live with for more than a decade. I would soon learn that it had nothing to do with what I was about to experience. I can't say how long it was before it started, but it must have been a few months after I moved to a little trailer at the end of a long road clearing the woods. Our nearest neighbor was a mile away. My room was at the opposite end of the trailer from my mom and my husband's room. I also had a large window, which will be important in a minute. So, it all started strangely one night. Despite being exhausted from exploring the acres of forest I now live in, I couldn't sleep. So I'm laying there, cartoonish in the dark, trying to sleep, when suddenly I'm in the woods to the southeast of the property. It's a place I've been to before, but not really much, even though I recognize it, I guess. It was the strangest feeling, being a passenger in someone else's mind, seeing their eyes, but having no control, I guess, going. It was frustrating to say the least, and it quickly got worse as things began to move. It is an unnatural speed, predatory and precise, reminiscent of how an animal hunts its prey, from door to door, from tree to tree. It faded before it stopped again, giving me the time I needed to put the tray back on anyway. It only lasted a few seconds, and I was back in my body and back in bed. It was such a strange feeling, and I didn't even want to think about it because I didn't want it to be real. But the next night it happened again, and the next day, and the day after that. After a few days, I realized that it was always a little longer, and it seemed to allow me to see longer at night. I can't say how long it lasted, but it was long enough to be a normal occurrence, and long enough to make me think I was probably going crazy. One night, I came to find out that there was a trailer, and when I realized it, my mind was on some level of this thing, and all the fear started to rise up in me, deteriorating with every short pace behind the gate. Mind you, in retrospect, this thing didn't seem to work in the sense of time and space we were used to, because it would pick up every night where my consciousness left off, or whatever. But I don't think it's frozen until the next day, is it? I think he was playing a game or something. When an orca plays with a seal or a cat with a mouse, I think. But somehow as my terror reached a crescendo, I suddenly came back to myself. I don't know if I did it or not, but it killed whatever link I had. But this time it was different. I sat up straight and immediately turned to the window because I knew he was there, just a few feet away from the tree line. Until I wanted to see nothing, I pulled myself together and looked out the accountant's window at the tree line. I will never forget him for the rest of my life because there he was, leaning against a big tree at the edge of the forest. He was tall, like really tall, and the skin seemed to stretch over his bones, but I don't remember his skeletal anatomy or anything. All his features are elongated as if deliberately stretched. He had long claw-like fingers. It has become a common symbol to indicate someone closer to you. His face was large and humanoid, but with the same elongated expression. His wide and large, long, sharp teeth were thin and needle-like, making it impossible to even smile. And his eyes were really big, even for his size. He just stared at me through my window. Then he nodded and told me to come. I called him the Gray Man from then on, but I didn't have a gender. Whatever it was animal terror, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. But I had to actively fight an uncontrollable impulse to get out of it. It could force me to go to the forest. After some time, I was able to pull myself away from the window and crawl back into bed. I spent the rest of the night waiting for him to get tired of waiting and decide to come to me if he wanted to. It never happened, and when the sun finally came up, I couldn't feel it. This was the new normal for me. Almost every night he would come back and wait. Mandatory has been reduced, but that's really the only silver lining. I stopped sleeping a lot and spent as many nights as I could in my room, which wasn't often. After living for some time and always appearing in different places, he also approached at night. I don't have a complete memory of that night, or I guess I should say my memory is incomplete. But after suffering this thing for a long time, it was really getting to me. I was not sleeping, and it affected other areas of my life. It quickly triggered me in relation to the noisy environment, but one night, I woke up to this thing, something else, on the bottom rail of my bed. The only way I can describe it is that it looks like a faun in Pan's Labyrinth. It was very different from the character, but it's as close to analog as I can think of. It told me that it would probably get rid of the price from the Gray Man. Gray had a different energy to him than a gray person, but I don't think it was something that was well-intentioned. A gentle, almost predatory, opportunistic thing, I think. But I was desperate and tired, so I guess whatever he wanted from me, whatever the cost, I paid for it in the end. I don't know if it was a dream or what, but it felt real at that moment. What can I say? I was definitely on the lookout for the Gray Man, I'm pretty sure of it. In the end, he kept his end of the bargain. After that, my life went back to normal, I think. Well, normal compared to that, I guess. I recently visited my grandfather in Virginia to take care of him. I grew up visiting this house every month as a child. It's in Ivanhoe, Virginia, in Appalachia. This is an abandoned mountain town. Growing up in this house that was built in 1853, I always noticed the simple things. For example, the room I would always stay in faced the front porch, the windows, the rickety chairs, and one night I woke up to use the bathroom, looked out the window, and saw a dark, shadowy figure on the stone, a chair rocking back and forth with long, flowing hair. I heard a woman's voice, and then I ran under the covers and buried my head in the blankets until I could sleep. It wasn't the first time I saw this figure, but flashed back to other memories. In my sleep, I would try to sleep and hear the floors crack, and it seemed to echo all the time. Something was coming. At that moment, all 9 of my grandfather's dogs began to howl and bark. The shaking stopped, and then I heard a gasp, and the footsteps continued, but this time they moved away. All this was when I was 15, mind you. When I was 15, now 21, I had a dream of a house on fire, and as I ran out of the house, I looked back and saw a shadow walking over the fire. I woke up in a cold sweat and laid down in my grandfather's room. When I was 17, I went to stay with my mother for Christmas. When we woke up, we shared the same bed. My mother went into the bathroom, which has a window overlooking the Appalachian Mountains, and told me she heard a noise outside the window, and suddenly the bedroom door closed. Then she told me about her dreams of the house burning down, and that was the last thing that happened before I went to take care of my grandfather with dementia and Alzheimer's. He wakes up around 4 a.m. and sometimes I have to put him back to sleep. The first time I took care of him, he woke up around 4 and sat in the rocking chair on the porch. I woke up to the sensor lights flashing in my room, so I knew to pick it up. This time he spoke to the empty seat next to him, full on, about how the Confederate flag was mistaken for Southern pride or whatever. But I grabbed his arm and helped him up, when a woman's voice said angrily, what seemed like an inch from behind me, "Let me go. Stay because it's cool." I turned and froze, but no one was there. Then the dogs began to howl again. I need to come back soon to take care of her, but what am I doing here? What should I bring next time? Is it dangerous? What am I experiencing here? Around 2008 to 2009, my family, my mom and dad, and we visited some cousins, uncles, aunts, and cousins, rural Tennessee. We all sat in the living room talking while the TV played in the background. At some point, I went to use the bathroom. Their bathroom is located on the left side of the corridor next to the kitchen. There are no doors directly adjacent to the bathroom door, and when I was young, I tended to open the bathroom door before washing my hands to avoid getting my hands and germs on my hands. So I used the bathroom, opened the door, washed my hands, and out of the corner of my eye saw someone walking by the door. It is important to note that the figure moves in the opposite direction of the living room. The only rooms in the direction of the figure are the 2 bedrooms of the house. Apart from these rooms, the corridor is the dead end. It's important to note that I didn't just see this figure in my peripheral vision. It moved very slowly, and I felt dizzy before my eyes. With both eyes looking directly at the door, I saw a figure move from the center of the door to the left. The figure never acknowledged my presence, stopped walking, and never made a sound. I think the best description of the figure is an older woman. It's not far, but many seniors walk without a straight back. The figure is dressed in a sea-soil green dress that is not very saturated. At the bottom of the dress, a very light navy green. Enough is enough. I remember seeing legs moving. The figure is very dark and wears round square glasses with light brown frames. He had thick, curly, permed, gray-brown hair, probably the latest color. He was also slightly overweight. I saw it very clearly, but I think there was no clarity to it and nothing about it. When I got back to the living room, I asked the family that was there. All of the previously mentioned family members were seated on their respective sofas and chairs as they returned to their respective rooms. At this point, I thought my older cousin came in while I was in the bathroom or something, but they all assured us that we were the only ones in the house and that no one was visiting after my parents. I doubled over and told them I saw someone walk past the bathroom door. I even described the woman I saw. My brother immediately got up and started searching the house. Starting with the back bedrooms, he made his way to the living room, carefully inspecting every nook and cranny along the way. In the end, no one else was home. I quit after that. It was weird, but I don't think it was dangerous. I was never afraid at that time, but we went on with the day, and that night I was going to sleep with him in my cousin's room. I had never been in that room before tonight. When I entered, I saw a picture hanging on the wall, and my jaw almost dropped when I saw the same woman. She had the same hairstyle, the same glasses, the same size, and all the same features. I asked her about it, and she told me it was her grandmother. I knew they got the house, but it never clicked in my head. He apparently died in the old room. He told me that his room was his old room, and when his grandparents renovated it, they left this picture. At this point, I was a bit hesitant because he had a deer head mounted on the wall. I was a huge fan of The Evil Dead 2, and I knew the spooky shenanigans were afoot. This thing was going to make me laugh maniacally at some point in the night, right? It didn't happen though, and I slept soundly all night and didn't see or hear anything else. I have been many times since then and have never seen or heard from him. I've never seen another scene that I know of, so it's a really unexplained event to me. I've told people I know countless times, but I've never shared it online. I hope you enjoyed it and it always stuck with me, and if anyone has any thoughts or even similar experiences, I'd honestly love to hear them. So last night, my girlfriend and I were in bed. We both talked awake, and finally I turned off the light and went to sleep. My dog, a German shepherd, was lying on the floor next to my bed. As I turned around a second later, I heard a crystal clear whisper in my ear from my girlfriend's side. Less than half a second later, my dog starts barking at full volume at something in the room. It was a protective shell that was also exposed. I thought my daughter whispered something to me that sent the dog away. So I turned around and my daughter asked me if I heard the whispering because she didn't say anything. The whispering sounded to the woman and was so fast that I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it was right in my ear and my daughter's. All it took was all the windows closed, our phones on sleep mode, the neighbor's wall behind us well insulated, and the whole house closed and locked for the night. We also moved to this town 3 weeks ago. There are no pipes in the wall behind the bed, and the house was built in 1971. I then vacuumed the whole house, and as far as I could tell, everything was normal. I don't know what happened that night, but something tells me there is something wrong with this place. What do I think I should do about it? So the grandmother says that she met 3 black-eyed children. Apparently they asked him if they could come in. We have a garden with a balcony door that leads to the living room. They didn't look directly at him, and first looked at the floor. One of them asked if they could use her phone to call her parents, and Grandma told me to. He had never felt such fear, but he thought it was nothing really, because they were children, right? Finally, he said yes, and she told me that at last they looked at her with black eyes, which she had never seen in her life. He froze and watched as they walked into our hallway. Then the grandmother followed after a second or two and they left. They vanished into thin air. Now when she tells me this, she is very scared and shocked. My grandmother, mind you, would never do anything like that, or even talk about the paranormal, without access to the internet and those kinds of stories, because she just didn't understand how it worked. He had never used a computer in his life. She is a Turkish grandmother. I froze when I read about this scene. That was about 7 years ago, and it still amazes me every time I think about it. To be honest, I feel sorry for Grandma because it has had such a negative impact on her. This story happened last June or July, but my family would always spend about a week up north around the same time every year until recently. As my brother and I get older, our schedules become more frequent. We spent a lot of time in different camps during that time, but each of them was always provided with cabins rather than tents, because Mummy and I are not into that kind of nature. Anyway, we would be there with a bunch of family members, and we would always have a great time. One of the first days we were there, my extended family was all sitting in the kitchen enjoying breakfast when the topic of ghosts came up. Now I grew up believing in ghosts because they were common in my family. I lived in a rough place growing up, sharing an apartment with parents who had strange encounters, etc. So this topic is extremely unusual and always leads to hearing some of the funniest stories we've ever had. One of them was about my mother's brother or father. I'm not really sure, but I'll call him Pete. That's why we have so many strange encounters in our family members or strangers, so it was normal to talk about this topic at that time. In context, Pete lived a great life. I think he was very angry and sad, and it led to him taking his own life at home. Now, the rest of this story is a little hazy to me, but I'll tell you what I know. My grandmother lived in this house for a while, and my parents, especially my mother, would come and visit. She said the energy in the house was always terrible, especially on the porch where she killed herself. Pete was a very angry spirit, often pushing things, moving things across the room and leaving a mess, etc. My parents were sure to tell him that they didn't mind. Fast forward to when I was born, my mother was a big part of my life. He helped raise me when I was little. He raised my mom, and he was generally amazing with kids. Sadly, he passed away about 6 years ago, and I miss him dearly. but my mom says that Pete was following her, getting confused by things when she moved, and my mom noticed that Pete was following her too. It wasn't as dramatic as the house, but little pieces of it seemed to follow them in my mind. Back in the cabin, though, my parents, brother, sister, and I told these 3 stories. We'd heard it before, and I remember telling Pete once, rudely, "Note 2, don't insult ghosts, especially ghosts." But we continued to discuss the topic, and suddenly my left ear became completely deaf, and my right ear began to ring very loudly. Like most people, I'll say that I get ringing in my ears sometimes, right? But never in my life had I heard so much. The ringing in my right ear grew louder, and then I heard a voice over my shoulder. "There, Nana," deep, almost screamed at him. By the way, Nana is what we call my mom. I get so dizzy when I hear noises that my left ear is back and my right ear is very hot. I remember I wasn't really scared at the time because ghosts were normalized for me, but it kind of freed me up a bit later with the whole context. I explained what happened at the table, and no one seemed fazed by it. I know it sounds weird, but then again, we've been dealing with things that seem like forever. But this is still one of my favorite paranormal stories to tell, and I wanted to ask you all, what do you think? Both skeptics and spiritualists are welcome to comment, as I would love to hear both sides. To give you some context, I am of Mexican-American descent. Although I was born in the United States, my parents were born in Mexico and spent most of their early years there. My mother also grew up on farms in rural Mexico, where the houses were spread far apart, and the nighttime brought a pitch-black darkness that was hard to explain because of the lack of streetlights. One day, he was going to dinner with his brother and sister before it was dark. While passing through a remote area, my mother looked up into the sky and saw a mysterious light moving. He kept this vision to himself, knowing very well that he was a witch, a common belief in many parts of Mexico. They enter the party and enjoy the party, forgetting about the strange scene for a while. However, when the party ended at midnight, they returned home through the now opposite village, and halfway there, an inexplicable light appeared in the sky once more, and this time, his siblings saw it too. They continued to walk in silence, not daring to tell each other the strange sight. Just then, out of the blue, my mother jerked and turned around, apparently catching a brief glimpse of the mysterious lady looking for them. Almost instantly, the figure seemed to turn into a glowing light and fall into the sky, all in a matter of seconds. He couldn't shake the fact that he had followed them for some time after watching them. This is a story my mom told me so many times over the years, and I think it's because it never sat right with her. It happened last week, and while he didn't seem evil, his words were definitely hilarious. So I, a 19-year-old male, was going home to university and had to use the train to get home. When I visited, many seats were occupied. The seats in my country are set up so that 4 people can talk and sit in front of each other. They are close and great for conversation, even with strangers. But I see that there are a few places in front of this girl who looks 1 or 2 years younger than me. But you never know what I'm thinking. Anyway, I go over there and ask if I can sit down. Of course he answered, and looked at me with a strange, intense look. I pulled out my phone to distract myself from it. He also had chocolate in his hand. This will be important later. But he asked me where I live. I was like, why should I know? Then he asks when to get off the train. I told him the place, and he told me he was coming down the next road, and then he started singing, and then he said, "Oh, sometimes I sing. I'm a crazy girl." Then it worked again. When he said something, he looked at me like he was waiting for an answer, so I replied, "It's okay to be stupid if you want," because I didn't want to talk to him. Then he told me, "You are beautiful." "What do you mean?" when I ask. He asked if she was pretty. In my language, the second is an extension of the first, so it seemed to fix itself, I think. He then asked if she had chocolate on her face. He did so. I also took the chocolate he offered me, but I declined. He also told me about his hole, which he apparently put in the middle of the train. I told him he could fix where he got it, and he said in German, "Are you going there with me?" Of course I told him no. Well, he tried to get the tooth back and his mouth got pierced. Then he told me he was in love. I told him I have a girlfriend, I don't. But the university I go to has prettier girls than I can tell you about, and the biting is too much for me. And he told me he was going to beat up my girlfriend. Then he said, "I love you, and I steal you, and I steal you." He then asked if he would go with me, and if he could come home with me. Then, when the train reached its destination, he asked me, "Are you going now, love?" I said yes to him, and I was confused as to what was going on. Luckily, he didn't follow me, which I was very grateful for. He also asked when we were going to meet, and to be honest, I hope it never happens. It was a few years ago, but I think about it often. My 3 little sisters and their father and I were standing in the checkout line at the grocery store. My sister couldn't have been more than a year old, so I was 10 and held her in my arms. A middle-aged woman joined us behind us. He tried to get my sister's attention over my shoulder, just talking to her. I thought he was clearly a baby lover, so we directed him as a little polite gesture to get him to come closer and hold out his hands. It all happened so fast that I almost couldn't react, but when I was about to pick her up, I had enough time to scare her and I yelled, "I'm sorry, don't touch her, get away from us." The way he approached us, it was almost as if he wanted to take it, or take it somewhere. Meanwhile, my stepfather stepped between us and this crazy woman and asked her what she was doing. He suddenly became sheepish and almost made her laugh. But instead of backing up, he passed us and then tried to push us into line. I think my stepfather would have exploded if he hadn't beamed at this lady and waved us forward. After that, he left us alone, and it was very sad. But the whole experience shook us all. The woman gave me a very good vibe from the beginning, and I had no idea what her intentions were. I think he probably thought I was going to let him hold my sister for some silly reason. It's like giving a child to a stranger, but who knows? Anyway, it still blows my mind when I think about it. So I am 19 years old, working and have 2 children. Me, my fiancé, and our kids are currently living with his parents as we can't get our own place right now. About a year ago, her sister, her 4 children, and her husband also lived with us. They are honestly not great parents at all. I mean, they let their kids get away with a lot. But they changed when they started living here, because none of us would be like that with them. I've been with my fiancé for 4 years now, and my nieces and nephews know me very well. They also sometimes call me uncle. The older daughter, 4 but 3 at the time, was always a bit of a problem and still is, I think. But the time we live with has come when he seems to be very dangerous, insanely aggressive, and super rude. I'm not saying that he was or was, but I believe that something negatively affected his behavior at the time. At that time, several other things happened. Our youngest daughter was still in her crib at the time and slept in our room. I know the signs of spirits or entities or cold spots. His crib always felt super cool compared to the rest of the room. He also had time. He seemed to wake up in the middle of the night for no reason. It was as if someone or something had hurt him or tried to play with him. My sister also talked about seeing a big man on the corner at night. Remember, even if it's not furniture or toys, something must be wrong with such a person. He would wake up screaming and terrified, would refuse to go back into the bedroom and would just point to the corner. Then the father spoke up and said that he had also seen a shadowy figure in the bedroom several times. He tried to say that maybe it was his grandfather who had died recently. I didn't say anything, but I knew it couldn't be right. Basically, shadow figures are not human spirits, but often non-human beings. I had the same experience. One night I slept on the sofa in the basement not far from the children's room. I woke up to see a young boy who looked like he was homeless, beaten and wearing old clothes. He was probably inches from my face at the time, but when I blinked, he was gone. Our older man also started to say that he was randomly seeing animals at night, which he had never mentioned before. My fiancé and I are not religious at all, but we thought we would throw some holy water, and surprisingly, it seemed to stop things, and no one noticed anything. They also moved out and have been living alone for about 8 months. But what do you think? Spirits? Random? Or maybe just a child's imagination? So I work at a mid-sized hotel in a random town in Ohio. It's not beautiful or historic or massive or anything. Really nothing about it. But my colleagues joke that it's haunted because in one room people get weird vibrations, and the old elevator used by most housewives opens and closes slowly, when no one is around at random times. I personally experienced some strange things that convinced me that something strange was going on inside the hotel. I haven't shared these stories with my co-workers, but I'm sure some of them already know. My most obscure story, which I have yet to share, happened in room 217. So I put things in order in this man's room when they were in a meeting or whatever, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. I thought it was uncomfortable because the temperature was set at 90 degrees. Maybe it was something else. Anyway, after making sure the room was empty, I started making the bed. When that was done, I went into the bathroom and bent over the tub to grab the used washcloths. As I bowed, the old woman said, "Thank you." Clear as day, he was by my side. After that, he had a few more words, clear as day, but for some reason and without looking back, I saw an old woman at the door and left that room. Maybe she was thanking me for cleaning her room, but she didn't want to go in at all. But no one was there. Maybe it's in the hallway. No one is there. I immediately panicked and then ran to the nearest utility closet. I went through all the possibilities, maybe like a TV, but no, the TV was on mute and it was a guy talking about the weather. Maybe it came from another room. No, there I went into all these rooms and everyone was going to the meeting. Is there something playing on my headphones? I wasn't wearing headphones. None of it made any sense, and I refused to go back into the room after that. Another thing that is confusing me is that many people have died in this hotel over the years. 2 people in my room overdosed, and I had to clean up that day. And I knew there were a lot of cases, and I wasn't in the room to hear about it. The strange thing is that I didn't see the police show up. I didn't hear the firemen. What happened to the bodies? It's a little uncomfortable to think about, I think. There's this college across the street that has events a few times a year. It seems that at almost every event, one of the freshmen is missing. The latter left the building through the back lobby, nothing with him, and got into a car, and he has not been found to this day. He left all his belongings in his room and didn't take his phone with him or anything. Not everyone is really worried, and I don't know what to make of it. Well, let me start by saying that I never believed in an afterlife. I'm one of those. You've got to see it to believe it. But my parents tell me that I apparently saw ghosts when I was really young. At one point, I was so scared that I asked all the demons to leave before I was 30. I don't remember any of that, though I always imagined it or something. But apparently it worked, and according to my parents, they stopped showing immediately. Well, I turned 30 last year, and about 6 months into the year they came back. Well, at least one did. I couldn't sleep. I just lay there awake and thought I'd get up and walk around the house a bit. You know when you feel someone standing behind you? I had it very strong, and I thought it must be my roommate in the back. I think the floorboards moved a bit, and that's how I knew someone was there. So I turned around completely hoping it would be my roommate, but it wasn't. It is a shadow in the shape of a man, like a man made of darkness. They were about a foot shorter than me, and they looked very large. I just stood there and looked at them in amazement. I remember thinking, oh my God, and I think they were looking at me because they stopped for a moment. Then they surrounded me. I turned around and watched them walk towards the stove. Once they reached the oven, they disappeared into thin air. I couldn't sleep after that. I spent the rest of the night thinking about what I'd just seen. But it's hard to believe that after all these years, I finally know the truth. You are real. Maybe the afterlife is real. You think I'm scared, but I'm really excited. I would like to see more of them, and I hope they will appear again soon. I guess I've always been that weirdo. I was never afraid of the dark or normal things that other people were afraid of. I wonder if it should be medium or something. Does anyone know how to take this further and strengthen this capability? Also, has anyone else seen it? Do they look like a shadowy person to you? What did you do about it? What should I do? So, it's 2012 and I've just finished high school. R moved from Florida to Maryland in Maryland and DC area. I spent 2 summers between college working for him, giving him a little break, running the crew, moving, changing locks, cleaning the house, taking pictures, etc. Our routes sent us around DC, and he often got together in the morning and then looked through the Daily Mail and other articles. He somehow ended up in DK on Bunker Hill Road from the movie The Exorcist. Now that day my brother and I were there, and we decided to stop at the old 3-story house. Honestly, I don't know what happened there. I knew about the movie The Exorcist, but I've never been into horror movies, so I didn't know much about it, I guess. Well, a 14-year-old boy lived in 1949, and the house where The Exorcist was performed no longer existed. Today, it is a typical historic street with old houses, empty trees, beautiful grass, and more. It's now a park, even with dusk to dawn no entry signs. On the property where the house sits, there is an octagonal pavilion for the public, which I remember raised by a ramp maybe 3 feet off the ground. There were bushes surrounding the pavilion around the ramp, so we decided to walk there. It was quiet on the ramp, nothing weird, but that was about where it was going to be weird. So we walk up the ramp and into the center of the pavilion, and it's not until we're actually in the pavilion, almost dead, when we hear a noise. It wasn't like a single fly or a bee flew by, but hundreds of insects, which we assumed were flies, began to buzz in unison from all around the pavilion. It was very strong, and there were many in the bushes. They didn't seem to be flying either, so we just stood there and looked around and then at each other, and we were shocked, and then we didn't stay. Bugs are totally normal, I get that, but I don't understand why they don't make noise when going up the ramp or around the pavilion, because they are so close to the bushes. I mean, heck, I've saved a few properties and never seen anything like that on Mother Nature, or anything for that matter. These summers I've experienced ground bees to spiders, books on voodoo, witchcraft and sorcery in the basement, glass orbs, crystal balls, trap houses, and we've even explored an abandoned insane asylum there. Something about this moment just doesn't sit right with me, and it still sets me free. I mean, it was a loud noise, something I had never heard before, and really, it had to be an absolute mountain of bugs to make that noise, and with the number of insects around, it doesn't make any sense. So 1992, between the ages of 10 and 12, my brother, mother, and sister and I moved into a beautiful house on the south side of St. Louis. It was your basic layout, 20 feet away and built in the 40s and 50 ES. It was a nice 4-bedroom, and I remember my mom saying it was cheap. Immediately after moving in, these strange things started happening. From doors slamming, footsteps upstairs, the TV changing channels automatically when no one is there, etc. It was sad stuff, but nothing my 10-year-old self could get over. After a few months, we noticed that things got a little weird. Basement sinks have black water coming out of the drain, and that same water will flow through the walls of the house. What makes it worse is that it smells like sulfur. The basement was also a dangerous place. I've never felt so right. My brother, who is 2 years older than me, I begged her to sleep in her room because she would say something that would wake her up like 3.04 in the night, and she said it really scared her. Now, my brother usually didn't want anything to do with me, but we always fought and laughed at each other, so his request was a big deal to me. I remember one night we sat up all night waiting for 3.04 and nothing happened. Maybe I don't remember, or because we woke up, he didn't show himself. After all, the soil in the yard was almost silver. I still don't know why or how it got that color, but my brother used to say it was the tombstones. There are so many crazy things going on in this house, and I could go on and on about it forever. Finally, one day I was walking home from school, and when I got there, my mom had put all of our things in garbage bags in the car. He asked me to get in the car and said we are moving now. She never said what happened to her, but over the years she told me things like she and my aunt covered the upstairs with flour and immediately noticed the bare marks. The remote control was thrown from the table once into the air and thrown at him and even hit him in the face. My bed once went through my room, and my toys were always upstairs when I wasn't home, and I had to explain to him that I was going to put them back before I left, so I didn't throw them away. When we moved in with Grandma, I hadn't seen anything since. A few years ago, I was living in an old neighborhood in the city and walking down the street. To my surprise, the house was gone. It looks like there was a big concrete slab where the house used to be. Now, this was a city street, so it was pretty obvious to get lost, but even Google Maps shows a blank space with an address number. I often wonder what happened to him. I personally think it was like the end of Poltergeist, and he got absorbed into another dimension or something. Well, I like to think anyway. I wish I had the resources to look into what was going on, but I've never been able to find any clear records or crash logs. Most people think I'm crazy when I talk about it, but I know it's not just my childhood dream, especially since everyone in the house witnessed the same events. This is a summary of the experience environment for context only. I grew up with toxic parents, suffered from depression for years, and cried a lot in the corner of the room. I tried to remove myself there twice. I shared my room with my sister, who was abusive to my mother. There was a lot of crying on his part in this room. It meant that it was a very negative time in our lives. And during that time, I had several episodes of paralysis. And I also believe I experienced astral projection, to the point where I thought a spirit was trying to get me out of my body. So the story started when my sister was visiting my sister, and my cousin told her she was possessed and showed her what the demon told her to do. Separating the couple from the neighborhood was a ritual, with mirrors and smoke and so on. And his mother moved from one psychiatrist to another to explain and treat his behavior. The conclusion was that my cousin was schizophrenic because he was seeing and talking to someone who was not there. Just as a side note, our family is the type of family that, even if they witness a demon firsthand, they don't believe in it and try to get a medical or scientific explanation for it all. Anyway, my sister, then 15 and a woman, came back scared to my cousin and told me, a 22-year-old woman at the time, about what's going on, and I'm like, okay, it's bull. But I listen to him and comfort him as much as I can. She swears she feels ghosts during rituals, and I say it's psychological, and my cousin is probably crazy and needs to see a doctor. As she moves forward, my sister becomes convinced that she is a ghost. He told me the spirit told him so, things that will help him, warn him about things, and guide him. He can't eat like he used to and starts avoiding the bath, and after a while, the whole room starts smelling like rotting meat. I would push him into the bathroom and make him wash every week and deep clean the room every week, move the furniture, mop the walls, and the smell got worse and mostly came from the side of the room. I made sure he was free from hormones and showers, so I made sure to throw him in the bathroom at least twice a week, deep clean the room, and give him different deodorants and perfumes. Although the smell worsened, so did the behavior. Amazingly, she knew my dad was coming back by the minute. It was like a pop quiz. She knew who went where and why, and she could talk to a lot of people, doing whatever he wants. There were also many strange things. He always seemed to be tired, the deepest black eyes and many wounds. We did all kinds of blood work on him to fix it, but everything came back to normal. He would find dead mice and other strange things in his bag. So now, on to the experience. That night my sister, my little sister, who was 5 years old at the time, came to sleep with us in our room, and I was in the room reading really late. I decided to sleep until 2 a.m. I had this strange feeling of wanting to run away and stay out of my room, but I pushed it away. I went into my room, and when I opened the door, it smelled so bad, like something died. There was no air. It was hard to breathe. I opened the window to let in some air, but I didn't notice any change. I stuck my nose to the window to get some fresh air, but there really wasn't any. I decided to go to bed anyway, and my body was screaming to get out of the room. I grabbed my pillow and went to my room, and then I thought, no, ghosts and ghosts aren't real. This is my little sister's fear. The smell must be equipped. We have to replace it and understand it only in the morning. So I finally turned around. As I lay down, the air became very heavy. I moved, and suddenly it's hard to explain, but my hands felt like they weren't mine. So I touched my body, and it felt like something or someone else was touching me. It was relaxing, and I opened my eyes, and then I saw this giant black figure standing at the end of the bed. It was so big that it was so black that no light could penetrate it. I blinked and it didn't go away. I was like, well, I'm really tired from not getting enough sleep. It must all be in my head. So I turned to her and tried to sleep. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep in what I believed to be a dream. I woke up, and the demon was there, very black, and had an evil feeling coming out of it. I run to wake up my sister, but the demon stops me, so I run to the door to find my mom and knock on her door before she opens it. I told him what happened. He didn't think about it, and the demon was coming after me, so I ran to the bathroom to hide. There I saw a flame in the mirror, so I ran to the room but could not open the door. So I just knocked until I forced him to open it. Then the night lamp went off and I woke up. When I woke up, I was terrified, but the room smelled like before, at least as bad as I slept. There was more light in the room than before. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I stayed up all night before everyone woke up. I saw my sister walking in between. He said he was very tired and more blue than usual. I also noticed that the bedroom door did not close. It moved horizontally and somehow it didn't fit the bottom of the door or something, and no one knows why. My lamp, it really exploded and my curtains were on the floor, and I saw them pulled from the wall as if someone had used a hammer to hang the rods. It was very strange, but I told myself that everything had to have an explanation.